much for having us. My name is Ann Henry, and I am the Director of Development Operations at Settlement. I've been there for almost 3 years. Previously, I was at the Kimball Center for almost 6 years. So I'm just going to give you a little bit about Settlement today, and then Eric is going to tell you about Settlement, where we came from to get to today. Settlement was founded in 1908 by two young women who wanted to give young immigrants opportunities in their new country. And their idea was to give them piano lessons for a nickel, or however much they could afford. The Philadelphia Orchestra members were the early volunteers to teach these lessons. All of them were also immigrants. And because there were no conservatories in America yet, they thought they would start in the neighborhoods in Philadelphia. In 1916, Mary Louise Curtis became the first board chair, and she funded the first building, which is still our branch that is at 4th and Queen, and it is called the Mary Louise Curtis branch. We now have grown to 6 branches, 5 physical and 1 online, and they're purposefully put in neighborhoods all over Philadelphia. We're in the Northeast, we're in West Philadelphia, South Philadelphia, Willow Grove, Germantown, and then online as well. Our mission has always been to reach people who would not otherwise have access to quality music education. Our programming is in instrument lessons and ensembles as well as chamber music. But we reach all ages. We have students as young as 6 months, and we have some of 6 months old we have a children's babies workshop. They kind of just get exposed to the music, yeah. And then we have some 96-year-olds still playing in our adult chamber music players. We have an award-winning pre-K that has an arts integrated curriculum, a creative arts therapy program, 70 community partnerships, and that includes 8 schools in the Philadelphia School District, where we provide after-school band, orchestra, choir, and drum line. If you've spent any time in Philly, someone has a Settlement story. You've run into them, I'm sure, all over, but a few of our most notable: Questlove is an alumnus, Kevin and Michael Bacon, Albert Einstein took lessons at Settlement, and many, many others. I want you to know, as a fundraiser, I am kept extremely busy because we offer unlimited financial aid, and that looks, yearly we give over $3 million in financial aid away. And we are one of the only community music schools in the country that offers unlimited financial aid, which means if a student enrolls in August, we have financial aid for them. If they come in April, and we don't have it, they look at us and they say, you need to raise more money. Most schools would just say, try again in the fall, and we don't do that. We don't turn anyone away. And then I am now proud to introduce Eric Anderson. He is our unofficial official archivist and historian. He's going to tell you more about himself, but he joined Settlement in the late 80s as the branch director of our Mary Louise Curtis branch. He is also a professional trombone player, and in 2012, he moved to our Germantown branch as director, and since he retired several years ago, has committed himself to researching Settlement's archives at Temple, and has even done some work in the Curtis Institute archives because of the deep connection between the two institutions. So I'm happy and proud to introduce Eric Anderson.
By the college settlement to gym teachers. They didn't really want to be gym teachers, but it was what was available at that time. So after they'd been there for a few months, they went to the headmaster, the director, and said that they would very much like, we're talented pianists. We've got a neighborhood full of immigrants who have come from a history of having music in their lives, and we want to provide lessons. And so begrudgingly, the director said, okay, well, there's a couple of rooms down there, and there's a piano, so you can use that to get started. Well, as you can imagine, it really took off instantly. And within just a couple of years, they had something like 200 piano students. But they enlisted early on volunteers from the Philadelphia Orchestra. And one of those volunteers was a violinist and violist by the name of Johann Gralla, who was Dutch. He had studied at the Amsterdam Conservatory and was a member of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And he came and taught violin and viola lessons, but he was very much interested in the American settlement movement. And within a year he started in 1908, within a year, by 1909, he had become the director of the program. And by 1910, there was a board of directors that he had formed. And as a matter of fact, I saw, in looking through the archives, the very first handwritten minutes from the very first board meeting of the school, which for me was just fascinating to see and to hold that in my hand and to know that that's where all of this started, over 100 years ago. So let me take a look at some of my notes here. The branches were mentioned. Anne talked about that just a minute ago. And the reality is the school had branches almost from the very beginning, which I was really surprised to hear about. But by, I think it was by 1912, they had branches in Kensington and in up at Front and Lombard was another branch. So very close in the neighborhood, but the whole idea of spreading out to the community was something that was considered from the very, very beginning of the school. So by 1913, they had already established an endowment, a modest endowment, but they were already starting to look at this as really as a long-term project. And of course, Mary Louise Curtis got involved in this, and she was the one that actually funded the construction of the school at 416 Queen Street. She made sure that the properties were purchased, they demolished the houses that were there, and they built that building. And it opened in February of 1917. Another kind of interesting aside, my wife is an organist and is involved with the Organ Historical Society out in Villanova. And they have in their archives the original records from the Aeolian Organ Company in New York. And we found the original contract for the organ that was signed by Mary Louise Curtis that was installed at the Settlement Music School in 1917 at a cost of $10,000. So that, that was, to me, was a fascinating thing, that they, right at the very beginning, they also wanted to have a fine instrument for these students to work with. So the school actually was chartered as the Settlement Music School of Philadelphia in 1914. And we have the original handwritten and hand-signed charter hanging at the Mary Louise Curtis branch, which is something that I found, I don't know, a couple of years after I started. I was digging through a closet, and back in this closet, covered in dust and all, I pulled this charter out. And I took it to Bob Capana, who was the director at the time, and I said, "Have you ever seen this? This is the original charter for the school." He said, "We got to hang it up." So we did. And by the way, the building, when it was built, was dedicated to Mary Louise Curtis's mother, who was Louisa Knapp Curtis. And that original plaque is still in the entryway of the school. So early on, it was as if there was just a perfect storm of things coming together to make all of this happen. Because very early on, we've got a school built. In 9 years after the school was founded, it's in this beautiful building with beautiful instruments and serving hundreds and hundreds of students. The old apocryphal story is that they started out at a nickel a lesson and they had people lined up out the door, so they thought, well, we'll double it to a dime a lesson. And then they had even more people showing up. So that's whether that is actually true or not, it's a great story. So the school actually then was moving along very well at that point, and by 1922, Johann Gralla, the director, very much wanted to provide more of a conservatory experience for the students that had been coming up to that point and who were more advanced. And so he started what was called the Conservatory Division at the school. So in 1923, the Health and Welfare Society, which in Philadelphia, which provided major funding for the school, had their annual review of the school, and they looked at the school's budget, and they said, you don't have any line for maintenance or repairs. And why is that? You've got this huge building and it's obviously well maintained. How do you do it? And the board said, well, actually, we don't own the building. The building is owned by Mary Louise Curtis Bach, by Mrs. Bach, and she provides funding for us to keep the school running. So we don't have that line item for our budget. And they said, well, and then the other thing that really concerns us is actually that you started this conservatory division, so it sounds like you're leaving behind your settlement roots. So we're not sure that we're going to continue funding you at this point. So of course money talks, and the board got together and said, well, if we have this conservatory division, it's going to have to be moved somewhere. If we can't keep it here at Queen Street. And so that's when Mary Louise Curtis got involved in actually starting the Curtis Institute of Music. And she purchased that property at 1726 Locust Street, where the Curtis Institute is still today. And that satisfied the fact, and they said, okay, well, you've moved the conservatory division out, so we'll continue to give you money. So, but I always thought that was very, very interesting that and Johann Gralla was the first director of the Curtis Institute, but only for 1 year. He directed the school for a year and then was basically co-directing both Settlement and the Curtis Institute at that time. Then he came back to Settlement, and Curtis went on with other directors at that point. She was sorry that she was going to have to reduce her monthly commitment to the school from $2,000 to $1,250. Well, just think what $2,000 was in 1932. And the fact that she was doing that every month in and month out. And who knows how much she was giving to Curtis. I don't know what her regular supply of income was for the Curtis Institute. But it just gives you an idea of her generosity and her commitment to this artistic program in these two incredible institutions. Some very interesting things from early on. The first published curriculum I found, and it was for piano, violin, cello, kind of the basic instruments like that, was done by Mr. Gralla in December of 1936. So this is something that was going on very early on. And another very interesting thing, and this is in the colloquial of the time, of course, that Mr. Gralla started a class for colored teachers, was opened recently as we felt the need of offering these teachers the opportunity to be better prepared. So there was integration at the school at a time when virtually nothing else was integrated in the city of Philadelphia. And there are great photos from the 30s and I think probably from the 1930s, 1940s of the choir program at the school and equal numbers of black and white kids on stage. And I think that was just something that you didn't necessarily see otherwise. Another thing that Mr. Gralla did that I found very interesting is he founded an organization in 1911 called the National Association of Music School Societies. And that was his attempt to try to organize community music programs from all over the country. And at that time, there was a program like this in San Francisco. There were programs in New York City, of course, at that time. Cleveland had the Cleveland Music School Settlement, which is still in existence today. And he brought all of these people together for a national conference. And it was the very roots of what has now become the National Guild of Community Arts community arts organizations.
Yeah.
Yes, it was the National Guild of Community Schools of the Arts when I was involved, and then their name changed. But that organization was actually founded in 1937 by Mr. Gralla. He was the first president of the organization. Settlement was one of the founding members of the organization, and it exists up until the present day. So it shows you the power of community arts. We were talking about some notable current students. There were also some notable past students. Two very prominent members of the Boston Symphony in the 60s and 70s. Burton Fine was the principal violist of the Boston Symphony, and Jules Eskin was the principal cellist. And they were both kids from South Philly who were in chamber music classes at Settlement back in the 40s. So, I just thought that was really interesting that there was this connection between Settlement and Boston for some reason or another. In the 1940s, I was able to review, and thankfully, somebody saved all of the original appointment books for Mr. Gralla starting in 1924 until he retired in 1951. And so I could go through on a day-by-day basis and see who signed out for lessons, who Mr. Gralla was meeting with, all of this interesting stuff. And this is where these names come in. I see Mr. Gralla on April 26, 1937. Mr. Gralla, here's Burton Fine, age 7. So it just gives you an idea about the reach of the school and what he was doing at that time. Mr. Gralla had a very, very serious idea of what community arts should be, and he was constantly badgering Mary Louise Curtis for money because he was an ardent socialist. He went to Russia back in the 30s and came back with glowing reports of how things were being run over there and how we should have more government involvement in the arts. And then he would turn right around and ask Mrs. Gralla for hundreds and thousands of dollars. And the other thing that he did was he bartered in violins. He loved to buy and sell violins, and he always said it was that he did not profit at all from it. But from the correspondence that I read at the Curtis Institute, where all of her correspondence is, there was letter after letter of him saying, "Look, I ran across this great old Corneri violin. The guy only wants $20,000 for it. This is something you should buy. It would be a great investment, and it would be something that would be great for the Curtis Institute to have." Now, I'm not making any money off of it, so understand. I don't know anything about